You're welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, has confirmed the first 3 cases of Omicron variant of COVID-19 in Nigeria. Canada has banned travelers from Nigeria, Egypt, and Malawi over fears of spread of a new variant. The House of Representatives is asking the federal government to ensure that it puts in place guidelines to further prevent the spread of COVID-19 and ensure that Nigerians comply with the directives.
The House of Representatives has asked the Federal Ministry of Health to mandate the COVID-19 task force to immediately activate strategies to be implemented in monitoring adherence to COVID-19 guidelines and ensure residents continue to comply with all advisories aimed at curtailing the spread of COVID-19. These were sequel to a motion by Representative Dachong Bagos on the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Federal lawmakers are also asking the Nigeria Center for Disease Control to ensure intensive observation and checks on inbound passengers.
Concerned that a total of 126 genomes of these variants have been detected globally and published on GSED, a global mechanism for sharing sequencing data, and there seems to be a high number of mutations present in the Omicron variant and the exponential rise against the virus to be highly transmissible and may also present an increased risk of reinfection compared to other variants of concern. The House resolves mandate the Federal Ministry of Health to mandate the COVID-19 task force to immediately activate strategies to be implemented in monitoring adherence to COVID-19 guidelines and ensure residents continue to comply with all advisories aimed at curtailing the spread of COVID-19. Mandate the Nigerian Center for Disease Control to ensure intensive observation and check to travel protocols for inbound passengers.
Meanwhile, a federal lawmaker is drawing the attention of the Senate to over 900 pending cases of gender-based violence in the courts across the country.
As at the 24th of November 2021, a total of 5,204 gender-based violence cases were reported with 3,125 survivors demanding for justice. Only 33 perpetrators have so far been convicted, with 972 cases pending in courts. This trend is unacceptable, and all hands must be on deck to ensure justice for all victims.
After considering the motion, the Senate directed its Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters to liaise with the relevant authorities to ensure the speedy prosecution of over 900 pending cases of gender-based violence in the courts across the country. Meanwhile, Representative Ifeanyi Moma has raised a motion of urgent public importance related to police and military checkpoints. He said over the weekend 20 people died along the Onitsha-Owerri Expressway, and he blames it on these checkpoints, which he believes are wrongly located. Amendments were made to the motion to prevent a repeat of such an incident.
The House should mandate the Inspector General for Police to ensure the removal of illegal checkpoints across the country.
Mr. Speaker, I want to amend that they should remove all those wooden barriers in any checkpoints across the Federation because it's affecting the lifespan of our roads.
Meanwhile, in a separate motion, the House is calling for urgent measures to secure schools against kidnappers and bandits.
The Federal Ministry of Education, the State Ministry of Education, the private school owners have not taken steps to provide adequate security in schools across the country to prevent attack. The House concerned that despite this development, the Federal Ministry of Education and State, the House also appreciates the federal government's intervention in school feeding program. However, there's an urgent need to provide adequate security in schools in the country to ensure the safety of the school.
In the meantime, the Green Chamber is still interested in the report of its committee on the disappearance of the Vanguard journalist Todwe Salem, even though he has been declared deceased.
Rising from the mixing of one of the journalists that reports
for Vanguard on this floor. And of course, you made some pronouncements. And we gave our committee 2 weeks to make their findings and report back to this House, even though we heard that eventually the young man was found dead. But by compliance, the committees have not even come here to submit their report and even tell us what happened. It's not just about whether we found him dead or not, but the findings and what led to it and what else to do. These are things that I think I'm worried about that our committee has failed to do.
The Speaker mandated the relevant committees to ensure that the report is submitted within a week.
The Senate, through its Committee on Interior, is to investigate jailbreaks across the country. There have been several jailbreaks this year in Imo, Oyo, Kogi and Plateau states, and the Senate wants the Minister of Interior, the Attorney General of the Federation and the Comptroller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service to investigate the status of correctional centers nationwide with a view to finding out the challenges in order to prevent further recurrence.
On Sunday, November 28, armed men attacked the medium security custodial center in Jos, Plateau State, killing 9 inmates and an officer in the violence. There have been similar attacks on prisons in the country this year. Armed men attacked a prison in Imo State in April, freeing more than 1,800 inmates. 266 prisoners were forcefully released by gunmen from a medium security custodial center in Kogi State in September, while a correctional facility in Oyo State was attacked in October with prisoners set free. A federal lawmaker is alarmed by these attacks on correctional centers in the country.
The Senate is aware that the Jos Correctional Center is well fortified and surrounded by major security formations, and is indeed located in the center of the city of Jos. The Senate is further aware that the invaders walked through a security zone and broke through to have over 200 inmates escape from the center. Equally aware that the warders put up a fight against the invaders but were overwhelmed, leaving behind a slain warder in the person of Umar Mohammed, who lost his life in a gallant gun battle against the attackers.
How on earth
Legislators blame the attacks on insufficient security operatives in the country, porous prison system, and a gap in intelligence gathering.
This call for our urgent intervention in terms of providing more personnel. More personnel. I cannot see any. Okay, fine. We said that we are finding we fight now with technology. Yes, it's true. But in the interim, since we don't have the technology available to us, or even if you have it, it's inadequate, why don't you use personnel?
The prison system is so porous. Some of the prisons establishments, correctional centers, were ones that were built since colonial days. I can say that about 60% of them were prison systems that were established during the colonial era. This particular kind of thing is unacceptable, and it is something that is harmful to the public and terribly harmful to the security of this country.
Now, having given all of this requisite funding to the security agencies, why are we still having these challenges? I think it is something we need to sleep over. But in the interim, it's clear that we have a serious intelligence gathering gap. There's no debate about that. And I'm also thinking that maybe, notwithstanding the request of Mr. President, which request has been obliged by the National Assembly with respect to funding for the security agencies, I'm still thinking that maybe the DSS, and most especially the office of the NSA, I don't think they've gotten the kind of funding that we require for this fight.
Accordingly, the Senate, in its resolutions, mandated the Committee on Interior to invite the Minister of Interior, the Attorney General of the Federation, and Comptroller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service to carry out full-scale investigation of the status of correctional centers nationwide with a view to finding out the challenges to prevent future recurrence of jailbreaks. Meanwhile, the Senate has called on the presidency to urgently take over and resuscitate the largest ship in the fleet of the Nigerian Navy, the NNS Aradu. The upper chamber is also requesting that stakeholders in the maritime sector, namely the Nigerian Ports Authority, Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, as well as Nigerian Customs and Nigerian Immigration Services, should put together a funding regime to refurbish the Navy flagship. The Senate adopted these resolutions after considering a motion by Senator George Sekibo during Wednesday's plenary session. Senator Sekibo said the NNS Aradu was transferred from the presidency to the Nigerian Navy for maintenance, and the Navy has been unable to keep it afloat properly because of insufficient funds.
Understand that since NNS Aradu entered Nigerian Navy service, she has undertaken part in major naval exercises, fleet reviews, and diplomatic cruises. She played a prominent role in Operation Sea Dog in 1985 and Operation Odeon in 1987. She has also undertaken extensive diplomatic visits to countries like Gabon, Congo, Zaire, Equatorial Guinea, and many European countries. The misfortune of Aradu was the transfer of the ship from the presidency to the Nigerian Navy for maintenance, which will not afford to keep it afloat properly due to the envelope budget system. Urge the presidency to take over the NNS Aradu as a presidential asset and resuscitate it for our national security, safety, and pride. 2, urge the Senate to convoke a roundtable of all stakeholders, such as the Nigerian Ports Authority, NPA, Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Nigeria Customs and Customs Services, and Nigerian Immigration Services, with a view to fashioning out a funding regime to facilitate the refitting and refurbishing of NNS Aradu to carry out its onerous role in servicing Nigerian maritime domain.
During the week, the Senate amended the National Health Insurance Act, which was passed by the National Assembly last year. President Buhari declined giving his assent to the bill after making some observations on the proposed legislation, which required further legislative work, and he returned it to the National Assembly. Now, one of the key areas of contention in the bill is the implementation of the Basic Healthcare Fund. We spoke with the chairman, Senate Committee on Health, Senator Ibrahim Oloriegbe, to discuss the key amendments as well as the benefits of the bill to Nigerians. He also shared his thoughts on the Omicron variant of COVID-19 in Nigeria.
To understand the major point of amendment, we must understand what were the key reforms that the new act, the National Health Insurance Agency, intends to do. I think the critical thing is to make health insurance mandatory, and by making it mandatory, it means everybody, either you're employed, you're unemployed, you are rich, you are poor, you must have insurance and through that have access to health. But as we are aware, so because of that, we are aware that the majority of Nigerians are poor and they are not in paid employment. So those people, we classify them as vulnerable groups. These will be people that either they don't have employment, or they are underage, the youth, the children, or even the other vulnerable group, the pregnant women, but mostly the poor. The major amendment we now did is to comply with the Finance Act and Finance Act, we remove that tax. But because we still need to fund this vulnerable group, we created what we call Special Intervention Fund for the vulnerable group health insurance. So that's the critical amendment that we did to the bill. So we still want the insurance to be mandatory for everybody, and we still want vulnerable groups, and vulnerable group fund to fund for those that don't have paid employment or don't have regular or sustainable sources of income.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. We'll continue with the interview with the chairman, Senate Committee on Health, Senator Ibrahim Oloriegbe. The Senate and indeed the House of and indeed the National Assembly has just concluded its budget defense sessions with various MDAs. Now, I sat through some of these sessions, and particularly the one as regards your committee, the health committee, one of the issues we noticed was that on the day you had the Minister of Health, your committee observed some discrepancies in the budgets for the ministry, particularly as it had to do with donor funds. Has this issue been resolved?
Well, yes, it's been resolved. As you may recall, the minister was given to come back the next day, and the ministry requested for them to be given more days, which we did. So they came back to represent a more comprehensive and more acceptable figures for the budget. And the discrepancies we will be able to realign. It's not discrepancies per se, it is what we call lack of full disclosure or reporting. Because what was submitted for us, it did not contain those details. Two, what we're asking about the donor and grant fund is that it was not reported in the first submission. What is it that they have drawn? What has been spent? What will they do with what were given? Those details were not there in the initial submission. But subsequent submissions, because it wasn't only one, it was twice that they had to come back. I'd be able to clarify that, and we have an alignment, and it enables us to know where we were as far as those funds are concerned and what we should recommend for the 2022 appropriation.
But why are we seeing this sort of issue as regards budgeting and proper record keeping from some of these MDAs? Do you think this is a deliberate, a deliberate action by some of these MDAs?
I think it will be lack of coordination, I would say, between the various units of a ministry. The ministry is big. It has several departments and so on. So what you see is that there's no effective communication and coordination between the various departments. They have the finance unit, under which they have their budget office, who compile things. But for most, for example, donor fund, grants, and so on, there are benefiting departments, and even within a department, a division, who has a desk officer. So there's no, the central coordinating point ought to be the office of the permanent secretary in every ministry. From what we observe, it is because those various units, divisions, or even departments that implement the various interventions, they do have the figures, they have the minutes, they interact or relate with stakeholders related. But this report, does it come centrally now to the finance, the DFA, or the budget person, and now to the PAMSEC, who eventually will collate and present a report? That is what we saw. Because after we sent the ministry, for example, the Ministry of Health as an example, when they were sent back, the PAMSEC now has to call or send circulars to all units, collected all the relevant information. The informations were there, but it's only that it isn't put together. So without, but essentially what I would say again, with all the ministries, because we are doing our oversight effectively, that's why they thought they just submit document to us. You know, when they come, if you see my office, you see a lot of documents. You bring big book like this, but that's our work. And I think, let me just divert a little bit. The public don't realize the volume of work that is here. If you're in a committee, ministries will submit very big documents containing all those things. You have to go through, analyze. It's only so sometimes they thought we don't do that. But because we do that, if we do it effectively, then we're able to point out. So the summary is that there's lack of coordination and communication within government agencies, which it has its effect. You may not ask that question. And the effect is because it means that efficiency and effectiveness is not being achieved.
Now, what about your committee's observations as regards the implementation of the Basic Healthcare Fund, which your committee had an issue with when you were interacting with the Minister of Health? Has this matter also been resolved?
Yes, partially. I say partially because based on what we ask, the resolution is that the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund implementation started in 2018. And then it was in 2019 budget, 2020, and 2021. So the resolution is that we were able to track from their report. The 2018 was fully released and already disbursed. 2019 was partial, 2020 has not been released, and 2021 has not been released. Released in terms of it getting into where it should be. And the issues were because it requires certain compliance by states, LG, and facilities. So the money will only get into where it should be used once these issues are resolved. So it's not every state of the Federation that had complied with those requirements. Hence, their funds are not dispersed.
The Omicron variant has been observed, been found in Nigeria, but there's been, some concerns by some countries, South Africa, and even the African Union, as regards the actions by some of these countries banning, some countries from traveling to their own countries. Nigeria specifically, Canada has banned, Nigerians from coming directly to Canada. Do you think it is an unfair position by the Canadian government and even other countries who have this same stance?
Yes, I do share it and even go beyond it. One, but that action is not based on science and it's not based on what I would call the facts and the epidemiology of even the condition. Going back, when the COVID-19 was detected, as at that time there was lack of understanding. Yes, everybody locked down and so on, but now we understood the process and so on. And even the Omicron variant they are talking about, based on the risk, the further reading I've seen about it, it's amenable to the vaccine. What I mean by it is that if you are vaccinated, you're unlikely to have it. Two, it's not virulent in terms of it causing more disease or making somebody to die more. The only thing about it is its transmissibility. And three, why I say it's not based on science is that viruses, mutations is something that we know from time immemorial based on our understanding of virus. We are aware that the virus will mutate, it will change. But the only thing is, but one thing that is good about mutation of virus, which we have known over time, is that when it's mutating, it's likely to get weaker and weaker. It's occasionally there may be one that may not be as weak, but even when you have such, because of your understanding of the process, it's just to know what will make it work. Where am I going? The influenza virus, the virus that causes influenza fever, which happens every year now, particularly in the cold part of the world. Do they ban countries from not traveling because of influenza? No. Do they lock down because of influenza? No. But it still affects people, and some people still die every year. Not because of it. There's vaccines for it, but despite that, there are various variants of it. But it's because it's been understood. But when it started, about more than 100 years ago, it was a pandemic, it was too serious, but years down the line, it didn't go completely. So I share it. And besides, one thing we have to know is that why are we having this variant where we're having it in those countries? It's because of low level of vaccine, of immunization. And there is that, how will I call it, inequity, racism and apartheid and discrimination against distribution and use of vaccine. The first world, so to say, and second world, who have the capability technically and financially to produce these vaccines, they were hoarding it. They are now releasing because some of them will get expired, so they want it to be used. At the beginning, even countries that have, like Botswana, where they said, Botswana had money, put money down to buy. It wasn't they didn't supply them because they wanted for their people. Now they are banning. So it is unacceptable, as based on humanity, based on the principle of UN, and based on even the principle of being one brother's keepers. So I will say that, besides, when they said they banned somebody because of Omicron, like Canada banning Nigeria, it's not indigenous to Nigeria. What is the level of when I said level, I'm talking about the prevalence of even COVID-19 in Nigeria. The total case we saw so far is still less than 300,000. Total death less than 3,000. This is far, far, far lower than what happened in all those countries in terms of the number of deaths they record. It means that something here which makes us not to suffer from it. Yes, our level of vaccination is not yet the percentage we want, but it doesn't warrant that.
This is where we draw the curtains on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.